Well, hello, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the show. This is the podcast Righting Wrongs. My name is William L. Myers, Jr. I'm an author. I'm the author of the Philadelphia Legal Series, and we are broadcasting on Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. Today, I have the privilege of talking with David Swinson. David's path to writing was incredibly varied. He was a music promoter. He produced the Atlantic Records album Sound Bites from the Counterculture. He was the force behind the cult classic film Roadside Prophets. And then he went on to law enforcement, becoming a decorated police officer and detective with the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. David's novels include The Second Girl, Crime Song, and Trigger, a series he's built around a hard-boiled PI and drug addict, Frank Marr, who I like. We're going to be talking about David's experience as a writer, the art of writing, and his new book, which is coming out in May from Mulholland Books, which is City on the Edge. And I'm reading this right now, and David, I'm really, really enjoying this book.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show. So why don't you start by telling us how you got into writing? I mean, all this other stuff you did, and then being a very serious and decorated police officer, what made you make that leap into becoming an author?
I actually always wanted to be an author ever since I was 17 years old. And then when I went into college, I got my degree in film communications because I thought I would write screenplays. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, I was always a writer. I always wanted to be a writer. But, as life would have it, I went on different paths. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how it happened, but, maybe because of my father and stuff like that, law enforcement was always, my dad was not in law enforcement, but he was close. Mm-hmm. I always liked the idea of becoming a cop, but I never thought I'd stay for as long as I did. And I thought I'd be able to really get some good material there, but I ended up going there originally maybe for slightly the wrong reasons, but then ended up loving it, and it changed my life, and I just had a passion for it, and I stayed for a long time.
How long were you a police officer and a detective?
17 years, and I was a detective for the bulk of that. I was in uniform for a couple of years, and then plainclothes, and then I made investigator pretty quickly, and then detective.
Right. Now I know your first book came out in 2011. Were you, and it was called A Detailed Man. Were you mm-hmm. a police officer at the time?
Yeah, I was. That book was published. Actually, I had a really good agent for that book, but couldn't get it published, and so it ended up going with a very small publisher called Dimaxicon out of San Francisco, mm-hmm. which I was very happy for. I mean, because that book sort of opened the door for me for exploring first-person present tense, mm-hmm. and Marr came shortly after it because I wanted to create a character that was so outside of myself. I was rejected so many times, like between Detailed Man and other books. We both know that feeling. And so then I just decided I'm just going to go do something different. And again, something totally outside of myself. And so Frank Marr was created.
Yeah, he's a very interesting character. I mean, he's a hardcore ex-police officer, private investigator who has this nasty secret that he's a full-blown drug addict. Mm-hmm. How much of your experience as a police officer and dealing with crime and being in Washington did you bring to that series of books?
Didn't really deal so much with cocaine. A lot of crack and heroin and mm-hmm. PCP, stuff like that. But a part of my job as a detective through the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, was to debrief and interview prisoners. Right. So I spent hours and hours with countless prisoners, defendants, cooperators, and not so much people that were willing to cooperate.
Right.
And I just learned so much about addiction through them. And crack and heroin are different monsters than cocaine. So I didn't really want to give Frank something that was really difficult to deal with. I mean, I think my inspiration for Frank's addiction was Hunter S. Thompson. Not I think, I know. I mean, definitely was the inspiration for him. Because back in the day when I was promoting a club and booking it, I had an evening of conversation with Hunter S. Thompson. Well, not me as a host, but him on stage just talking. And so I got to know him and how he really got away with his lifestyle until, of course, the end.
Yeah.
But so he was my inspiration for Frank.
Yeah, and I know from your bio that you had a lot of interactions with a lot of counterculture type of people. How much of that, if any, has made its way into the books?
It will into the new one that I'm working on now, a lot. But Frank Marr was sort of into counterculture. He was a counterculture guy, so I'm sure that if Tim Leary were around, Hunter S. Thompson, he'd find a way to make friends with them, or Abby Hoffman or people like that,
Let me talk a little bit about writing. Are you an organic writer? Do you just sit down and say, I'm going to put my protagonist in a chapter and we'll see what happens? Or do you map it all out ahead of time where you say, this is where this guy's going to end up. These are the problems he's going to face. Which are you?
I would say I'm more organic, but I do take copious notes. I mean, I'll sometimes get a book in my head for a year, for months, and just have hundreds of pages of notes, but not outlines. And I don't map things out. I sort of like to see the story take on its own life. I might have an idea, where it's going to go, and what I even think the ending might be. And as writers, we all know that that doesn't often happen. But I love to see the story just take a life of its own.
How many times has it happened to you, if it's happened to you, where you set out to write a character and you kind of have an idea of who this guy is or who this lady is, and you start writing them and they decide that they're somebody else and they push back at you and they just turn out to be different than you thought they were going to be? Yeah,
that happens often. Not so much with the protagonist, although it did happen with Frank. A little bit, but with I don't want to say minor characters because they're not really minor, but with other characters that were, you have one idea about them and then all of a sudden they become something else. Yeah, that happens often with me.
How did Frank change? How did he turn out differently or a little differently than you originally imagined him?
Well, the first draft, believe it or not, he was very, very even more violent than he is. And certain characters died in the book and I have an incredible editor, Josh Kendall, and he said, can we maybe soften them up a little bit? And I think that was the best advice I could get, because with Frank, you have to take a character that can be extremely unlikable, and figure out how to make them likable. So you don't really want to, have them do things that, are just like where you're going to cringe and go, oh, no way. And so that was the best advice I think I could get from Josh, was to soften them up a bit. And because he did start getting more and more violent. But then when he started softening up, there was a side of him that started coming out, which I liked a lot, which was he could see bad guys differently and almost empathize with them. And I really didn't see it because I thought I'd keep the more, despite his addiction, the more, I'm still a cop, Frank Marr,
Right. Did you learn anything writing that series of books? I mean, as a person or as an ex-police officer, did it make you grow or change the way you saw the world at all?
Not really, because that's really the world I saw. It honed my skills as a writer, and throughout the editing process, especially. I became, I think, a much better storyteller because of the Frank Marr series.
What do you think you picked up from writing him as far as the art of storytelling, crafting the story? What do you think you learned most powerfully that maybe you didn't know when you first sat down to start writing these?
Well, if you read A Detailed Man, which I do love. In fact, Dana King brought up that he was happy to hear us talking about that. That was more stream of consciousness, and there really wasn't this. It was not story driven. The second girl was very story driven. He had to find a second girl, and all this other stuff happens in between. And I think that the biggest thing I learned was to have small chapters, and I love small chapters because even when I read, I like, and the chapter tells me when it's done, but it also, I like the idea of finishing that chapter, but you have to turn the next page,
Yeah.
And there's been some books, a lot of Pelicano's books and stuff like that, where, it ends in such a way where you go, oh crap, I can't stop here. And so you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. And then the story just unfolds,
Yeah. So let me switch gears here because I really want to talk about this book. It's City on the Edge. Mulholland. It comes out in May. I'm reading it right now. Really enjoying this book. But it is. I mean, you're literally jumping across the world into a whole new type of storytelling and genre. The story takes place in the 70s in Beirut. The protagonist is Graham Sanderson, who's 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So, what made you decide to make this leap from writing Frank Marr to 12-year-old Graham Sanderson?
Well, I think that's another example of like becoming a cop and how it changed my life, and also writing the Frank Marr series, because I have been wanting to write this book since my 20s, because I lived in Beirut. My dad was foreign service, just like in the book, but
Right.
he's not. It's all fiction. And I've been wanting to write this for as long as I can remember. But every version, when I would start, it just was, just too, foo-foo, or frou-frou, or whatever you call them, too. It just didn't work. And then after Frank Marr, when I pitched the idea to Josh, he actually liked it, and I was very surprised.
Yeah.
And I had to, obviously, because of the genre, I had to introduce, a little mystery thriller type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically was a release for me because it's a highly personal book. And again, nothing at all like Frank Marr, but it was a book I really had to and wanted to write, and I didn't know. I thought it sucked, I thought when I was done, oh, this sucks. There's, and I didn't believe still don't believe the response it's getting from trades and stuff like that, and people who read it. And I think that's because it's so personal, and that makes it a little more authentic, I think.
When
But it
were
was always there. It was always going to be written.
Yeah. Why did you feel driven to write it? What about your own experience in Beirut made you want to write a story set in Beirut?
Beirut, out of all the countries we grew up in, Beirut is the one that stands out most, and it's pre-Civil War. You know, they've rebuilt that city so many times, but pre-Civil War, it was just, you would not think today that a kid could get away with certain things like running around your bare feet in Beirut, just going down to the beach with a buddy, or going out to Alhambra to the main drag. You know, not main drag, but the uptown,
Right.
and worry about like what the things you might have to worry about nowadays. It was just such a different setting, and so beautiful. And I mean, the landscape, and I mean, it just cried out to be written. And you know, having these kids, you know, I mean, we were so tightly woven together as friends, you know, because we all lived in the same building, went to the American Community School, and so you get really tight. But then the Civil War broke out, and there were curfews and all that kind of stuff. But you know, being a 12-year-old kid, you know, you tend to ignore such things. And my dad was never around, and my mother was really off on her own thing, and we had a nanny, so all that was real. But we snuck out a lot, and that's where the danger was. It was very, very dangerous to do that, because not so much to be kidnapped or anything like that, but a stray bullet, you know, bombing, you know, anything like that. So it was just, I mean, the setting, the characters I always had in my head, and then once I involved this little mystery and also this intrigue having to do with the father, it just was all very natural.
Yeah, I like, and there's a lot of detail in here about how they do sneak out in the curfews. They do things they're not supposed to do, and it's like you know, it's a coming of age story, but it's set in an area where there's war and pre-war. So they go camping, and funny things happen, and there's a flood, and there's tanks, and there's bombs, and there's curfews, and you know, there's the mystery at the heart of the story. So you kind of have the best of both worlds. I mean, I almost think that with the relationship between Graham and his friends, the parents, it could be, you know, a Mark Twain thing that happened in the United States, except that what's going on around them adds a lot of tension.
Yeah, and very foreign.
Appreciate.
Yeah, but it is very American. I mean, because one of the biggest deals was when a kid would go stateside, and this was in the book, and then he'd come back, you know, he'd take orders, you know, like how many Tootsie Rolls you want, how many Snickers,
right,
you know, whatever. And you get all these orders, you know, and then, you know, when you get your bounty when that kid comes back, because you couldn't get stuff like that there. So it's a very American, even though, you know, it's interesting you mentioned Mark Twain. I mean, I don't compare myself to him at all. I wouldn't have the nerve or the guts, but it is a very American story. It's an American story set in a foreign setting.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about it, set the book up for people who might be interested in reading it, to hook them into it? Because I'm hooked into it.
Oh, geez, I'm so terrible at that. Well, it centers around Graham Sanderson, who's 12 years old, but it's being told by his older self, who happens to be a DC detective, and he gets involved in a situation. They have a fort that they build called Chameleon Fort, which is built out of a thicket. And they would always go in there and do their spying and stuff like that. And he was there alone one time and witnesses something. And that becomes very dangerous. He witnesses a murder. But I think what came out of the story that actually surprised me, and I really didn't know, was the response that a lot of people are saying, like in Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and stuff like that. So just trade, not just, some nice trade magazines.
Yeah.
Is the intrigue with the father that's sort of making it sort of like spy type. I didn't think of that at all. I was just trying to think of having a kid in this setting, going through this mystery and trying to figure it out. And you remember, I was highly influenced by Stephen King's The Body, which became Stand By Me, where they have this group of kids, and the mystery is that they there's this dead body they want to go see down the river,
right.
And it was just a little short story, but it was done so well and so suspenseful, just having to do with a body you've never seen or you don't see until the end. But just the trouble these kids get into along the way and stuff like that. It's just that was a big influence.
Did you base any of the characters, his friends, Roddy, Lenny, anybody else, on kids that you actually knew in Beirut and palled around with?
No, that's not me. No, I'm truthfully, it's not me, and it's not any of my friends. They're total fiction. I'm really nothing like Graham. I was a little more of a introvert, He's very much an extrovert.
When you wrote the book, and I guess you're drawing from some memories that you had from Beirut. When you were done with the book, did it bring into sharper focus your experience in Beirut? Did it make you remember things better, or say to yourself, I didn't take that away at the time, but now I realize I learned this or that?
Yeah, the family dynamic. My family dynamic, very much, to the point where it just, it bothered me in a way, in a good way, bothered me that's what I took out of it. But there were certain things that are real that happened, like the sandstorm and the camping trip. Right. But actually in the camping thing, the way it really happens, how the tree is felled, is that correct? How the tree is taken down. It is actually chopped down by my dad, but that was not believable. To write that, it's almost like no, that right. But he actually did that. Dropped the tree across a flooding river.
Yeah.
But all that other stuff didn't happen. I did discover a gun. Did get in trouble with a gun. Yeah. Didn't shoot it. But my first experience shooting a gun was my dad's army issued a .45 cal and right. literally knocked me to my ass, man. Yeah. That taught me that this is not something to be messed with,
Right.
Yeah.
I found the scene of where Graham's father takes him after he discovers the gun. His father takes him, basically does what you're talking about, teaches him how to shoot a gun, teaches him safety. It was very touching because it was a father-son moment. The father is out, taking his son to do this kind of rite of passage thing that's very important. And I was deeply touched by that. And I think there are a lot of genuine moments in the book where it resonated with me just as a person thinking, wow, something like that happened to me when I was growing up. And
Yeah, that's what some people say, and I think that's the biggest compliment I think I can get, because I didn't know if this would resonate with other people because it's so deeply personal to me and takes place in an environment. Believe it or not, the copy editor, whose father was in the same sort of field, but he grew up in London and went to American Community School in London. He was just like, oh man, this is, reminds me so much of my childhood, except there was no war going on, but just that whole American Community School camaraderie, that whole thing, I mean, you can put that anywhere. You put that in Osage, Minnesota, population 400, and it's still gonna, be the same kind of experiences that, coming of age experiences. It doesn't matter what country you're in.
Yeah, and I think you do just a wonderful job with that.
Thank you.
So, let me ask you, what's up next? What are you working on now, if you're allowed to tell us?
Well, it's a book that takes place in 1987. That's another year that really stuck out to me. I was a concert promoter at a club called Bogart's in Long Beach, California.
Right.
Where everyone from the Pixies to the Red Hot Chili Peppers to Paul Stanley from Kiss to B.B. King, I could go on and on. They all played there. And I thought about this idea about having a doorman who's either going to be ex-military or an ex-cop, but only did a few years and just didn't like it. And involving a mystery surrounding a murdered kid that goes. It was sort of alternative. The club was very alternative and punk in many ways. So I was going to have it be like a punk rocker type kid that's sort of not being looked at enough by the police. And it just turns into something almost like Roadside Prophets, where the character, just gets little pieces of wisdom from. I'm going to actually have a scene with Hunter Thompson and Leary and stuff like that, based on stuff I remember. And I even have a good Pixies story, but I'd have to get to them and ask if I can use it. It's not bad. It just involves a box of Captain Crunch and finishing it in a hotel room, but nothing bad. No drugs, nothing like that.
Okay.
Captain Crunch.
Wow. I mean, you have just, reading your biography, you really did so many different things that you have such a real treasure trove of experiences to draw on in your writing, and you certainly make good use of them. If a young person came to you and said, David, I want to be a writer, what do I do? What would be your first piece of advice to somebody who wants to be a writer?
Right. And don't ever realize the obstacles that are in your way, because once you realize the obstacles, you're just going to screw yourself, because it's so difficult to get published. But just for me, it took, I'm not going to give up my age, but for me, I got published in my early 50s, and so it took a long time. But I'm not saying that I would not want to scare some kid into saying, okay, no, but to get ready for getting published when you're 60 something years old or 50 or 40. No, I'm not going to live that long. But just keep writing. And I think the most valuable thing I learned was from Jeffrey Deaver, and actually James Grady too, is have that set time where you just sit, and if nothing happens, nothing happens, but just have that set time all the time. And if you end up just staring at a blank screen for that whole time, then you're staring at a blank screen. But once you break that pattern, I mean, you can, have a tougher time writing. But there's different kinds of writers. I mean, some kid might be incredible at research, I'm lousy at research. I respect those who can research well and just,
Yeah.
but I write based on experience.
Yeah. So write and live.
Write and live.
Write and live.
Yeah. Treat your body well so you can live long.
Right. Live right. All right. So I think we'll wrap it up there. This is, for everybody who's listening in, this is William L. Myers Jr. You are listening to Righting Wrongs on the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. I've been talking with David Swinson about his latest book, City on the Edge, which I highly recommend. I'm really enjoying it, and about his other books before that. David, are there social media credentials that you can share with people? Where can they find you on Twitter or Facebook or whatever?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, David Swinson, Swinson. And I'm on Twitter under @Case Jackets, CASE Jackets. And Instagram, if you can find me there. I can't even find myself there. But and then I have a website, davidswinson.com.
Okay. Wrapping this up, this is William L. Myers Jr. I am the author of the Philadelphia Legal Series. You can find me at on Amazon where the books are sold, or www.williamlmyersjr.com. David, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Thank you.